ahead and start here. I'm gonna go tell them to... It's okay, man. It's like they turn off the air when these go on. Thank you. All right, so on the stage with me, we'll talk, and they got the slide back, awesome. The Business of Esports podcast is probably one of my favorite shows to listen to, especially the hot takes. Follow Paul on LinkedIn or Arda, they both retweet and reshare. Anyways, talk about the nitty gritty. I'll let, who's the host? Who's the real host? All right.
Are you kidding me?
I mean, that's true. All right.
So Arda, please. Hey, oh wow, that was very loud. Well, now I command the crowd. Now everyone can hear me and only me. I'm just kidding. In case you didn't hear me earlier, please give a big round of applause to Kai and the Informa team and everybody at XLive. This conference has been terrific. Honestly, in all sincerity, I know I was telling some jokes on stage earlier, but there is a reason that comes out of love, because there's a reason that I keep coming back to XLive. I've been with this conference since the beginning, and it's because there's such a professional staff and such great people like yourselves to be able to network. So hopefully you guys have met a lot of great people at this conference. Hands up if this is your first XLive conference. Awesome. So chances are that you were so impressed that you would like to come again. Before we start, I did this yesterday. I'm going to do it again, Paul. Just humor me for just a second. We have these really cool click things. So unless your name is Jazz in this room right now? I'm in a big battle with you, buddy. So nobody click with Jazz right now, because I need to come into first place. That's the guy whose legs we need to break, right? That's right. He's the guy that I'm competing with. So unless your name is Jazz, please turn to the person on your left and click with them, and do so with the person on your right, just in case you haven't met them, so that you can share some contact information and network. Jazz, I am watching you like a hawk. All right? The funny thing is the prize is a ticket to the next esports or XLive event, and I'm pretty sure I'll be going anyway, so I don't need the ticket. It's just more the bragging rights of coming in first. Anyhow, this is the Business of Esports podcast, ladies and gentlemen. For the last several months, myself, along with Paul Dawalibi and William Collis, who unfortunately could not be here, have been breaking down all the top stories in the world of esports business. What are those kind of stories? Well, those stories involve anything about the C-suite, anything about decision-making in esports, any investments in esports, money, power, and decisions. Anything that involves the world, those three things in particular in the world of esports, that's the topical news that we break down on the podcast. So what we're going to do on stage here is we're going to give you a little bit of a taste of how the podcast unfolds. And by the way, you can find the podcast wherever you listen. Are we podcast fans in the house? Raise your hand if you guys like podcasts. Ryan, my boss at ESPN, unfortunately does not listen to podcasts. We should encourage him, because podcasts are the best. And he is the best. You should definitely talk to Ryan. That guy right there, yes, him in particular, Ryan. That's it. His name is Ryan. He loves concerts. He's awesome. But anyway, what I'm saying is you can get this podcast wherever you get them. And let's start with this. We're going to give you a little bit of a taste of a podcast, then we're going to go into a greatest hits in terms of big topics that we often get from our listeners. And you guys will be very surprised with what our guest of honor to my left has to say. I am merely a traffic cop, a vessel on this podcast. My job is to get the best out of our analysts, out of William, who is a esports owner. He owns a lot of teams, including Team Genji, some prominent Hearthstone players. Unfortunately, like I said, he's not able to make it. But Paul is here. So why is this gentleman right here with the amazing Louboutin shoes, why is he on stage, and why are we listening to him about esports? Why don't you give him a little bit of a taste of your resume, Paul?
I mean, I'm not Pokimane, so that's unfortunate,
right? Yeah,
thanks
for Pokimane for warming up the crowd for us, by the way. Appreciate that.
My background's in tech, so I used to build tech companies, invest in tech companies. I did it for about 15 years, quite successfully. 6 years ago, I retired. I said, I never want to work anymore. I've had enough. And I've been a hardcore gamer my whole life. And a year ago, I realized, wait a second, it was becoming cool to be a gamer, and esports was kind of blowing up. And I said, maybe I can combine what I know how to do, which is investing and building companies, with what I love, which is gaming, and actually do something about it. And so I built a thesis that said, I think everyone is doing esports somewhat wrong, especially the investors, and I thought I could do it better. And basically for the next 3 to 5 years, I'll be committing a bunch of my own money, a bunch of my own capital to building, call it about 20 companies over the next 3 to 5 years in esports, investing in some outside teams where I don't think I can compete, but for the most part, building companies in the space. The podcast was a fun hobby on the side that has turned into its own animal. I don't know, does anyone actually listen to the podcast who's here? Has anyone ever listened to it? Okay.
You're the guy. Thank you. How nice of you to subscribe to us. Thank you. I appreciate it. Believe me, after listening to Paul for even 15 minutes, you will love what he has to say. He is nothing if not completely opinionated, and you will learn that very, very quickly. So the Business of Esports podcast, we deliver it every single Thursday. It goes up wherever you get your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play. What we usually do, like I said, is we go through the topics of the day. We're going to go through one topic, and then we're going to go through greatest hits. So one piece of news that actually recently dropped was the comments from FaZe Banks
today.
And what he said regarding esports. He essentially called esports a bunch of BS, and that is his term. Banks, of course, is the co-owner of FaZe Clan, which is a very prominent brand, a very prominent company in esports. This is his quote: "F esports, quite frankly. It's all a bunch of mumbo-jumbo BS, smoke and mirrors. I could talk about that all day." He goes on to give comments on Call of Duty franchises. And basically his opinion on the mismanagement of money and basically where everything is going. Yes. Now we should note, however, that FaZe Clan is currently in a $300 million fundraising round. Some of that possibly for esports. So when you hear this from a prominent member of the gaming/esports community, Paul, in your background in investing and what you know about the industry, what do you make of his comments?
I mean, FaZe Banks to me is the epitome, kind of the poster child for everything that's wrong with esports today. It's an industry that has succeeded in spite of itself. Run by gamers, built by gamers for the most part who have very little clue about business or how to build companies. And some of his, call it, outbursts over the last few weeks have been good examples of his inexperience as a company builder and as a manager, and maybe his immaturity as a leader. But for the first time in a long time, I actually agree with his comments here, because the crux of it was really these franchise leagues and how stupid these team owners are to buy into these franchise leagues, and no one's ever going to make their $30 million franchise fees back. And so strip away sort of FaZe Banks and some of the colorful language. I think there's a lot of truth here in terms of every single investor in a team today is massively underestimating the risk with esports teams. Massively underestimating. The teams are raising boatloads of money at crazy valuations, and basically they're selling a lie. What they're selling is football teams are worth $5 billion. Esports is going to be bigger than football, so our team one day is going to be worth $5 billion. And that logic, unfortunately, is flawed. It's a great sales pitch, but the logic is flawed because esports is quite a bit more complex than football. There's not one esport. And they're underestimating how much risk there is there. And if you look at any of the business cases around these franchise leagues, there's a chance you might make your money back after 10 years, literally. Like Overwatch League, Call of Duty, if you look at the economics for the teams, especially Blizzard with all the power that they keep in these franchise leagues, it's really a very small chance you'll make your money back in 10 years. Like that, as an investor, that business case is scary. And so what they're all betting on is that there's someone more stupid than them 5 years from now who will feel like this scarce thing, this franchise, is worth more than what they paid.
Okay, but what do you say to the fact that an Overwatch League franchise has literally doubled in value from last year?
On paper. And all that has increased.
Still being reported, so what's the answer to that then?
I think the people we should be congratulating are the sales team at Blizzard, not the investors in the teams. That those salespeople at Blizzard have done this amazing job to convince people that these teams, these franchises, are worth double 1 year later. That to me is the most amazing part. It's not that the teams themselves have doubled in value. Most of these teams, literally 80% of the esports teams on the planet, are losing money, like hand over fist, losing money. They're burning through cash at a prodigious rate, buying team houses and team mansions and God knows what. Like, these are money-losing endeavors and will likely be money-losing endeavors for the next 10 years. Not to say there won't be winners. There will be winners. 20% of the teams will win, will be very big, will be very valuable. But if you're an investor looking to bet on that space as a team owner, I mean, you have to be investing in 10 teams to hope that 2 of them win.
So you're saying teams are a bad investment in esports. What would you classify as a good investment in esports?
I mean, there's a few ways you can play as an investor. Teams is where most of the money is going today because it's the flashiest, it's where most of the hype is. Everyone wants to feel like they're a team owner. You could invest in private startups. So there's everything under the team that I call like the plumbing of esports. So there's a bunch of interesting companies there that you could bet on. As an individual investor, I think unless you're doing it as part of a portfolio, I also think that's a little misguided because then you're really talking classic venture tech type of investing. You could bet on public companies, so the Blizzards or the EAs of the world. But obviously I have my own thoughts there, and for listeners of the podcast, I've been quite critical of management at Blizzard and management at EA, both thinking very short term, mostly because they are public companies, and so they're measured quarter to quarter in terms of results, so that's really all they care about, even if it means mortgaging the long-term future of the business. And more we're seeing esports ETFs, so a way to bet on the space as a whole, very broadly. So if you want exposure very broadly to the space, I would argue today that's probably your safest bet as an investor. You're not going to make zillions of dollars, but it's a safe bet over time if you believe, like I do, that the industry is going to go up and to the right over the next 10 years.
So basically, just to give you a glimpse of the podcast, usually Paul is on one side of the argument, William is on the complete other side of the argument, and then I'm just the referee. That's basically the crux of the podcast. Let's generalize that then, and let's just talk about esports as a whole. So that's an example of how the podcast goes. We basically break down many news items like that, and we get opinion, we get analysis. So let's generalize just the esports industry as a whole. I mean, for as much as you've been saying critical things about certain things of esports, we've still been doing an esports podcast, and we still see a lot of investments coming into esports. A lot of celebrities are throwing money into esports. We're seeing a lot of names. It seems like every week there's a different article about some name that we recognize putting money into esports. So why would that be the case?
I just think it's a classic bubble. Tech went through it 20 years ago. Esports is going through the same, or at least a very similar life cycle. Like, Drake putting money in something is not some kind of signal to the market that this is a very valuable thing. Right? He's not studied the space. He may understand entertainment, but he has not studied the space and understand sort of the vision in the future here. Maybe I'm not giving Drake enough credit, but I don't think that's
But he has a great team around him. The people that are behind the scenes are making great decisions for him, so he might just be the face of this decision.
But just based on, like, I'm seeing now, I don't know, 10 deals a week, like 10 startups coming to me every single week with the most ridiculous valuations on the planet because there is so much hype around this. And whenever you have that much hype around a space, it will burst at some point and people will get burned. Like, this is an inevitability. Now, I think most people who listen to me a lot think I'm massively bearish on the space because I say things like that. I mean, it couldn't be any further from the truth. I'm putting almost like $50 million of my own money just in esports. And so I'm massively bullish on the space. I'm just bullish in the long term. I think long term, the inevitability of gaming broadly, not just esports, but gaming broadly, being the future of entertainment, all entertainment is a guaranteed thing. It's a guarantee that literally all other forms of entertainment, music, movies, TV, traditional sports, all of them massively threatened by gaming, essentially get consumed by gaming. So it's not that we will stop playing football, it's just we will no longer play it on a field outside getting hit. In the real world, we will do it in a virtual world where all the touch, sight, smell, sound, movement, everything is the same, but where I can't get hurt. And I could play basketball with a guy who's 7'1", instead of never being able to play basketball because I'm not that tall. So, you know, the long-term trend to me is inevitable. The short-term trend for investors especially is incredibly dangerous. It's incredibly fraught with risk.
We're going to get to some questions a little bit later on, but I'm sure there's people in the audience that want to get into this space. Maybe they're not endemic to esports yet, maybe they want to invest, or maybe they want to work in this space. So what are some best practices, some advice that you would give for those kind of people?
I mean, the ones who want to participate in the space, like brands or things like that, to me, and they said it a little bit on the previous panel, you really need to bring a buddy. You can't go it alone. If you don't understand the space at a very deep level, and this sounds elitist, but if you haven't been gaming for 10 years, trying to appeal to that audience or pretend like you understand that audience because you watched a Twitch channel for a few hours, like the gamer audience is incredibly unique and they're incredibly unforgiving. You mess up there once, they will not welcome you back with open arms. And so entering the space, especially for big companies that want to enter the space, the smartest thing you can do is bring someone who knows the space at a very deep level, but also understands your business at a very deep level and can figure out how the two can match or get along. In other ways, like what were you thinking, Arda, in terms of other ways of getting in the business?
Well,
I have no advice on how to be a pro gamer because, that ship sailed for me. But
I will say that Paul's best accomplishment, and we talk about this on the podcast, is entering local Apex Legends tournaments with pros that are like 19, 20 years old and just destroying the local field and feeling very proud of it. So you should be very proud of those medals that are on your mantle right now.
There you go.
A lot of people in the audience that are companies, right? Maybe some audio video companies, maybe they do other events, but now they want to get into esports events.
I think you really need to navigate with an expert. I don't think you can do it on your own, and I don't think it's something marketing teams inside a big company can figure out on their own. The interesting thing is, if you're like a marketing person at a big company today, or you're thinking about getting into esports in some way, the opportunity, like the arbitrage opportunity that exists today, the low cost of getting in versus the massive reward because it's not crowded at all, from a brand perspective, from a sponsorship perspective, like the payoff right now could not be any bigger. It will never be this big. And so unfortunately, what I see, a lot of the companies who come to me for help is they want to get in, but they don't want to lose their jobs. And so they're doing tests, right? They still want to put money in classic media buys, but they want to play here so that they look forward thinking. And the reality is that also tends to not work. You can't just sort of play around the edges. You have to really believe in it and go all in.
Hey, Paul, what's your opinion on mobile gaming?
Oh my God. Anyone here a really big mobile gamer? Before I offend you.
I don't think they want to identify after a question like that. What about mobile esports?
So I wasn't at E3, you were at E3. The amount of announcements I saw around mobile games sickens me a little bit. Purely because my belief is that mobile games are closer to slot machines than to games. Right, that those discussions belong at casino industry conferences more than at gaming conferences. They really are, for the most part, designed to keep the user addicted and spending money with very little entertainment value, or at least the least amount of entertainment necessary to get you to keep spending money. However, mobile gaming is massively lucrative as a consequence, the same way casino gaming is massively lucrative. And the audiences are huge, especially in Asia, right? Like I say this a lot in North America, and people tend to agree with me. If I had this talk in just about any big Asian country like China or Korea or Japan, like mobile gaming is really at the heart of those gaming cultures. And so the response there would be a lot less enthusiastic. But mobile gaming, the big issue I have is it really needs to stand on its own. Trying to lump mobile gaming in with, call it PC gaming or even console gaming, as an esport hurts the chances of esports broadly in my mind. That it's like, mobile gaming to me is like T-ball. T-ball, I'm sure if it came out today, everyone would think it's really novel, right? It's a guy standing in front of a base and he's swinging at a ball that's stationary, and everyone would think, wow, this is really cool, and they might go watch it and they might play it. But at some point, if baseball comes out, you go, wait a second, this is a much more complex game, this baseball thing. Like, I'd rather watch baseball because more skill is required here. And I think mobile gaming is in that stage. It's a novelty, mobile esports, not mobile gaming broadly, mobile esports, where it's like T-ball. But PC gaming and console gaming really are baseball, and I think that's the future of esports. And mobile gaming, I think if you're a brand, you may get burned betting on mobile esports that in the long term, because I think those audiences eventually will dry up. I think those audiences eventually will go upstream to more complex, more skill-based forms of gaming and esports. But look, I'm bullish on mobile in general and its ability to drive dollars for publishers and things like that. I'm just not bullish on mobile esports.
What's your opinion on Google Stadia?
It's hot garbage. It's dead on arrival. I will say this publicly. 4 years from now, Google will shut down Stadia, will tuck their tail between their legs and pretend like it was someone else's idea. But 4 years from now, it will not exist. It's just such a flawed, it's their most flawed product that they've ever conceived of. It's the most ill-conceived product I think I've ever seen.
You have to explain that. You can't just drop that and not explain
They
why.
don't know who they are. They don't know who they are. They want, like, if Stadia had come out and they say, look, it's $10 a month, you don't need to buy anything, it's $10 a month, you get these 30 games every month, and maybe they rotate that you can play, and they're casual games, and so it's a really cool, easy, like Netflix type subscription for casual gamers, I would have said, I get it. I wouldn't buy it, but I get it. To come out and say, you're gonna play the AAA games and it's gonna be just as good as you're playing on a PC, and we're gonna charge you $10 a month, and you still have to pay for the games, and by the way, if the service goes away, you lose your games because you need the service to play them. Like, it's just such a jumbled mess of business model and technology that doesn't fit what they're going after. You'll never have great multiplayer experiences or competitive experiences. Google can't defy the laws of physics as much as they might think they can. Latency, lag will be an issue. And so you eliminate that, okay. So if it's casual gamers, but now they still need to buy their games, they don't actually own them, they're in the cloud, and they still need the cloud subscription to be able to play the games. Like, it ends up being cheaper to basically just buy a console. And so I'm not sure who they're going after, and I think the reception's gonna be extremely lukewarm. I just don't think it's going to work. There will be, again, a novelty factor in the short term, and long term this will go away. Until someone can figure out how to stream the greatest AAA games at competitive levels with zero latency, zero lag, for one fixed price a month, like, streaming games will not be a thing.
So which titles are you bullish on in terms of the future of esports? Which titles do you really think have a shot of being captivating as an esport?
Look, in the short term, VR esports are laughable. I find it funny, and I wouldn't bet on it. But long term, forget about one title. Long term, VR esports will be the thing.
Why?
It solves the only criticism people have about esports today, which is, well, they're not real athletes. What are they doing sitting on a computer, like, typing and clicking? I think it addresses that directly, right? If I can create an environment, a virtual environment that is massively immersive and compelling, and create competitive games around that, where not only do you need to have the same hand-eye coordination you have playing a PC game, but you need to have athleticism while doing it, like, that's going to be a very compelling show. That's going to be a very compelling form of entertainment.
How far away are we from that, though?
20 years.
So we still have a ways to go.
We still have a ways
for
to go.
VR esports to
Meaning
become a
before
thing.
VR is at a place.
I can't put on a VR headset for more than 5 minutes without getting a headache.
They're getting better. They're getting better, but we're not at, people refer to it as the uncanny valley. It means it's the point at which virtual worlds are indistinguishable from the real world. And I think we're probably 20 years away from that.
We could get to, I remember talking with somebody who was really researching the world of VR, and he said it's not just about the visual, like being able to wear a helmet and look around and see a whole different world. Every single sense eventually will be replicated.
Yeah.
So it'll be touch, it'll be smell, it'll be depth.
Movement is
everything.
the big one, right?
Yeah.
Movement's the big one.
Movement, etc. Like everything will be replicated. So you'll be able to be in an arena and experiencing exactly like someone in that arena will be able to experience a sporting event, or in esports, almost be on the battleground as something is happening. You know, we're getting to that point from a spectator's point of view, but even more as a competitor's point of view, it'll be completely immersive.
But that's the really cool thing about VR esports and its potential long term, which is the spectator experience. Like today, the spectator experience is, I would argue, one of the most lacking pieces of the puzzle in esports. It's just not that compelling. The live events are cool, again, because there's some novelty, but the spectator experience is actually not that compelling. With VR, you can imagine literally being able to be in the virtual world along with the competitors, right? Now everyone is sitting courtside. Now everyone has the best seats. I think that is compelling. You know, I'm a Trekkie, and I think Star Trek has correctly predicted just about every big technological innovation. They predicted cell phones before we had cell phones as the future of communication, holodecks as the future of entertainment before we have holodecks. I just think that's where everything's going.
Geordie LaForge had the VR helmet on, something like that. You talk a lot about localization in esports. I think this is a very interesting point. A lot of people in this audience may not be native to California. They're around the world or around the country, wherever they may be. We always think of esports as a global entity. We always see, the idea of watching it from anywhere around the world, watching it online. We're all watching it together no matter where we are. But how important is localization to the success of esports, in particular as we now dawn on an era where leagues like Overwatch League will now be endeavoring to bring games from particular cities?
My answer, Arda, is I may contradict myself almost, so don't call me out on it. But
Or definitely call him out on it. You can do that too.
I dislike the franchise league model that Blizzard is putting forward. However, I respect a lot of what they've accomplished in the sense that those franchise models have made esports very accessible to people who wouldn't otherwise understand it because they've copied traditional sports almost exactly. And so that is the great success of Overwatch League and other franchise leagues. It's really copying traditional sports and making it accessible. Really, there's nothing else special about them. I'm a big proponent of localization, though, being important. And you see this with traditional sports. People will cheer for their city's team, even though they may not love the sport, even though they may never watch a game the whole year. If their city's in the playoffs, all of a sudden they're a fan. Like, there's a weird human attachment to the city you live in, and I don't think that's going away anytime soon. Esports, because of the complexity of the ecosystem, never really got that. Also because you didn't have at least in the beginning, didn't have the density of audience that you have today. So you couldn't do it. But not going that route, I think, dooms esports to not ever growing that big. You need to have, grandma and grandpa who maybe never watch an esports match in their life, maybe don't care about Call of Duty ever, but because they live in Pittsburgh, will cheer for Pittsburgh or will be proud that Pittsburgh won. And to access that very mainstream audience, tying it to a city is brilliant. Having said that, everyone doing it today is doing it pretty badly. Like the Blizzard model, is they control everything. They control the brand, they control the licensing of the brand, they control all the apparel, they control all the sponsorship revenue, they control everything. So all you're left with as a team is, well, I can throw parties in my city. And I make money off of people buying hot dogs at the games. I don't think that's a long-term sustainable model. So what I worry about is when Overwatch League crashes and burns and all these team owners...
When?
Yeah. No.
I try my best to keep him accountable, guys. I really do.
When it crashes and burns, because it will, because the player base is doing this, viewership's doing this, right? This is not like growth mode. When it crashes and burns, people will have hard feelings about that space. Like, people will have learned a hard lesson and may be hesitant to dip their toes back in the water. I mean, I saw it on the venture side clear as day. For a while, clean tech investing was the hottest thing on the planet. Everyone was a clean tech investor. And then some guys got burned, made bad investments. You know, the space was a lot of hype and not too much revenue. And then all of a sudden now, if you even mention the word clean tech in venture capital circles, like, people will kick you out of the room. It's a bad word. I think esports is going to go through that same growing pain, and as a consequence, the guys who got burned by Blizzard's faulty model, and hold on, I will say it's great for Blizzard, it's just bad for the team owners. People who got burned will be hesitant to jump back in, and they may blame the structure. They may think that was the problem. It's not.
We're going to get to questions in just a second. In fact, you guys can feel free to put the questions up on the screen as I ask this last question. I think that is very bright, by the way. I apologize. Now suddenly you can't see us on stage because this is completely shining on us. I'm sorry. While we adjust our eyes, I think a very compelling scene in esports that we are about to embark on is Fortnite and Apex Legends. This year we saw Fortnite pump upwards of $120 million into their esports ecosystem. This will culminate with the Fortnite World Cup coming up in New York in late July at the Arthur Ashe Stadium, where they normally have the US Open in tennis. So this is a very big deal in the world of esports, not just because of the eyeballs watching Fortnite, but because of the prize pool that is involved, millions upon millions of dollars. Having said that, a lot of people, especially when the game was released, was very bullish on Apex Legends, a very similar game, but a lot of FPS first-person shooter purists seem to gravitate towards that game a little bit more, saying that it was a more enjoyable experience according to them. And now we might be embarking on their esports season and more competitive official esports offerings. So when you see these two titles in particular, and let's throw PUBG in there because PUBG Mobile, as much as you don't like mobile, has really reinvigorated that competitive scene, and we still do see successful events with PUBG. So what do you make of the Battle Royale esports genre, and what are you looking forward to, or what is your analysis of the next year or two to come?
I mean, the biggest one is obviously Fortnite. Everyone talks about Fortnite, and anytime someone's throwing hundreds of millions, or 100 million in this case, of dollars at an esports scene, you have to take notice. The unfortunate part is Fortnite as a game has no future as a competitive esport. And let me sort of clarify that. The game is not set up to be a highly competitive, trying to sort of eke out the most skilled versus the most skilled. It's just not set up that way. It's set up to be more of a social network, frankly, and that's what it's what it has become. Like, if you ask any, and for anyone who has kids in the room, you ask any 8 to 16-year-old, Fortnite is more important to them as a social network than Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat or any of these. Like, this is the way they interact with people. This is the way they share experiences with people. Fortnite becomes the Facebook for that generation for the next 10 years.
Can I interject there? Did anybody hear about the Marshmello concert in Fortnite? So just in case people had not heard about that, Marshmello did a live 15-minute concert in the game, which was watched by upwards of 10 million people. So they all logged into the game, they all went to a specific spot on the map, and Marshmello did a 15-minute concert, and this was probably their most successful endeavor in the game. And that's just an example of the social sort of network or awareness that this game has, people sharing a moment like this in the game.
Yeah, and there are structural things that prevent, I think, Fortnite from being a highly competitive environment, like third person. But as a social network, it has tremendous opportunity to be disruptive, not only to gaming, but to, like, if Facebook was smart, they'd be buying Epic tomorrow, right? If they were really forward thinking as a business, and it's not going to be cheap, right? They'll have to pay 10, 15 billion, whatever the number is. But that's the future of social networks for entire generations. So I don't think Fortnite as an esport will survive much past the World Cup. They will have tournaments that are more entertainment than esport.
Okay.
So where people make appearances, where they bring other entertainers, and maybe Drake shows up, or
With that said, though, how could we say that it will fail or regress if we see this much prize money and this many eyeballs watching it, despite the fact that you're saying that it's not structured to be, which may or may not be true, but the prize money is there and the audience is there?
It will succeed as entertainment. And this is where, may call it semantics, but defining esports versus broader entertainment, people might think there's gray area there, right? It's not clearly defined one way or another, but I think most will recognize that they're not going just to watch the best play against the best, they're going for a show. And I think it will succeed as a show. And Fortnite, because it's more cartoonish, appeals to a broader age range versus like a PUBG, where you might have an older audience as a consequence, or an Apex has an older audience.
So where does Apex fit into all of this?
I think the problem all Battle Royale have is they're fundamentally complex to watch, and the viewer experience is not that good. All of them have that problem. Fortnite maybe even more than most, because the building makes it really hard to watch. But all of them have this issue.
Just to explain that, in the game, there's a building mechanic where you are literally building up high. To get the high ground is an advantageous position, so you are able to build on the fly your own structures to be as high as possible. And sometimes it's a little dizzying to watch if you're not necessarily dialed into what you're looking for.
But this is why Counter-Strike has survived as an esport for over a decade. It's because it's dead simple. It really is dead simple.
Pardon the pun.
Yeah. Right? It's bad guys and good guys, and all you have to do is kill all the bad guys, and it really is as simple as can be. Even Overwatch, for a new viewer, is relatively complex. All of these games have a complexity problem in terms of engaging a mainstream audience.
Let's get to some questions here. This is a good follow-up, actually. Thank you, Anonymous, out there, for all the questions. If Stadia is DOA, Paul, why are you giving it 4 years to fail instead of less? That is a great follow-up question.
The leadership at YouTube Gaming and at Google don't recognize their failure, so that's the first thing. And two, they have billions of dollars that they can use to support it for the next 4 years. So everything can be propped up if you have enough money.
Do you think Call of Duty will be successful as a franchise with a new game every year, or do they need a consistent game to move forward? We had a chance to, with the ESPN crew, we had a chance to preview Call of Duty Modern Warfare, and Ryan will attest that looked like the most realistic game I had ever seen. My heart was pounding watching the gameplay. It was surreal to see. Not necessarily esports, I'm just saying it was a surreal experience.
And in fact, we had Strauss Zelnick, who's the CEO at Take-Two Interactive, on the podcast a couple months ago now, and he has a completely different view of the industry, right? Like his belief is you take the time it takes to make a good game. So even if that takes 4 years or 5 years, it's more important that you make a great game and not so much pumping one out every year. It creates kind of an artificial urgency. I think Call of Duty, the crux of this question is, can an esport be successful without a player base? Like, I think if you don't pump out a new Call of Duty game every year, you potentially lose the player base, assuming Call of Duty stays about the same, right? The problem with Call of Duty is the experience is not that differentiated. And so you expect a new game, the new game gives you that feeling of novelty for a bit, and you play it. But the crux here is, will an esport survive if people aren't playing the game? And I think no. So I do think Call of Duty needs to have a new game every year, because they've completely programmed people to expect it.
Feel free to find Paul after we do this. Let's go to one more last question, because we're running out of time. We're up against it here. How do you foresee investment going into mobile gaming in emerging markets like India, seeing as how PUBG is so huge there?
Yeah, I mean, the dollars, there's massive dollars already flowing into mobile gaming, and massive dollars that will continue flowing into mobile gaming. And like I said, Asia, India, all these countries, mobile is, because it's more accessible, because you don't need expensive hardware, because mostly everyone has the tools they need to play it, mobile will thrive there for the foreseeable future, and there's massive opportunity to make money.
So like we said at the top, the podcast is every Thursday, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, wherever you get it. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram as well, at Biz Esports, B-I-Z, or Z if you're Canadian, and thebusinessofesports.com. Every single day, Paul puts in a bunch of links in a blog post so you can get caught up in the world of esports business. Many of those topics we talk about on the podcast. So thank you very much for joining us. Enjoy the